G'day everybody, Dan from Relevance AI here. I'm joined today by Jason. Some of you might know him better as AI Jason. We're here because it's a pretty exciting day in the AI space. OpenAI have just dropped a new model or a new model series. Jason, you want to tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, so OpenAI just dropping this new series of model called O1. They have two models, one is O1 Preview, another O1 Mini. But in general, these two models are really good at reasoning ability.
You say they're better at reasoning. Let's talk a bit about what that actually means. Can you tell us a bit about what's different about this model versus the other GPT models that have come out? Talk me through a bit of the details there.
Yeah, so one key difference is, I don't know if you read a book called Think Fast and Slow. So we're introduced the system one thinking, which is when the model basically just tell you straight about the answer, versus system two, it will think a little bit, which is really good for logic and reasoning ability. So far, all large language models do is system one's level thinking. You ask a complex question, it will just give you a straight answer. There's no thinking process in the middle. So it basically takes the same amount of computing power between answer a very complex math question versus just say hi, right? So the result of that is obviously previous model, it is really fast, but it is difficult to handle really complex math question, computing or coding questions. So with this O1 model, the key concept they start introducing is something called sort token. So before it actually spin out the answer, it goes through a thinking process. So when you ask what's the 3 multiply 3, it will goes through a whole thinking process, break down the question into multiple different steps. And it will even try multiple different strategy of how to answer this question as well. So you probably know AlphaGo, where one reason AlphaGo previously was really good at it is because it not only simulate one way of playing the next move, it will simulate multiple different moves and then play out how scenario play out as well.
That's really cool. And it begs the question for me, what does thinking mean? We talk about the model thinking. Do you have any details on what that process looks like?
Yeah, so to be honest, this is not something extremely new. Previously, all the prompt engineer has been using a mechanism called chain of thought. Basically, you were adding this little text in the end called let's think step by step, so that forced the large language model to start thinking step by step instead of answering right away. So give you an example, if you ask to code a HTML web page, instead of generating HTML directly, it will start going through the thinking process. Okay, what are the key components in this web page? What should be the code for each component, and in the end stitch together a HTML. Previously, chain of thought can force the agent to do that, but the hard part is that because each model don't have that kind of training data initially, so it kind of hit and miss. You might get it right, you might think in the right way, or you might think in the wrong way. But it looks like what OpenAI did this time is they probably prepared a huge amount of training data about how the thinking process should be for a specific task. This specific training for coding tasks as well as math tasks. And I assume they probably did a lot of work into collecting those high quality thinking process from industry experts. Then the thinking process became much better with the O1 model.
Makes sense. So that chain of thought thinking process that you usually have to design in your prompts, the OpenAI model is doing that sort of in the background based on these pre-trained data sets that they've got from industry experts. Makes a lot of sense. It sounds like then it might be consuming a lot more tokens as part of that process. Is that accurate?
That's exactly the point. So I don't know if you saw some of the kind of experiments people already start doing, but one thing is really key about this O1 model is that it takes really long time to process. So here's a tweet from Yuhi, who is the creator of Baby AGI. So he was trying out this model where it takes 9 seconds for the new model to just answer okay, and 16 seconds for another okay. Most of the time, you actually don't need this kind of process. And that's kind of because the way O1 model works is that it will just going through this reasoning process regardless about the situation. It definitely takes much longer time to produce those results. This is another example where this for O1 model actually need to take almost 2 to 3 minutes to generate a mid-level kind of math questions.
So it sounds like it's baked in this really good practice about doing the thinking process, but there's a huge trade-off in terms of tokens and time. Is it likely then that maybe what we'll see some people doing is continue to use the old models, but with their design chain of thought prompts because they think that that will work more effectively for their use case?
Yeah, it's very likely that people will start doing that because O1 model, even though it's super powerful at the moment, looks like it is really good at certain tasks because of those trade-offs we just talked about. And there are also limitations, it didn't really support multimodal yet. It didn't really support function calling, which means we can't really use that for agent use case specifically. So I would imagine what people will start doing is that you will start having a mix of different models in your large language model system. You will probably identify some parts that require very strong reasoning and planning. So if I think about example of a research agent, I might use O1 model initially to just spit out a plan about what kind of research plan we should make for this based on the research topic. But the actual function calling will be done by 4.0 model because it's much faster. I would imagine this kind of mix of model usage in the large language model application.
So that brings us back to the thinking fast and slow sort of equation where it's about identifying what sort of processing has to happen based on what tasks you're completing in your agent system. Makes a lot of sense. Do we have any evidence or has people done research on what sort of things O1 is good at versus bad at?
Yeah, so there are actually some really interesting demo people already did. So this one guy already integrated O1 model. So some context from what OpenAI mentioned, O1 mini seems to be a model that trained Excel at coding task. Versus O1 preview is more kind of generic, can across many like scientific or math task. So this guy integrated O1 mini into Cursor, which is kind of AI IDE. And it was able to spin out a whole iOS app in just 10 minutes. From someone that used Cursor a lot, I know this would be really, really hard to achieve in one go with previous model. So coding is definitely one part that became really, really good at. And that's also some kind of new use case will be enabled. And second is also math related ability. So it is able to handle math question much, much better. There was actually one AGI competition called ARC that introduced by researcher, and they are actually doing a hackathon. The winner will get a 1 million or 500K-ish price. And basically a bunch of logic and math questions. And it has been proven that the previous model is really bad at. So I saw people start trying out with this new model as well, because now you have kind of logic, reasoning ability built in. So math and logic is also really good.
We're seeing an improvement, I assume, when they're trying this out.
Yeah.
So there's one tweet I saw from Dr. Jim Fan, who's a senior research manager at NVIDIA, that talked about some really interesting concepts around search. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on that and what that means.
Yeah, so search is what we discussed initially, like system to thinking. So what they found when they built AlphaGo was that what AI is really great at is that play out different scenario and play out the whole strategy. And to do that, it means that model need to be able to search across based on where we are at and the goal, what are all the different options and strategy we can take next. And then you can think also multiple steps deep. So from math point of view, it's basically like a tree search. And AlphaGo, they did it in a way that is pretty effective. That's why they are so good, because they can simulate and then use that data to keep training the model. But that behavior is not available in large language model so far. As we mentioned, just spit out a token directly. But with what do we have now, it has a thinking process. And from what we see at the moment, it seems to do kind of limit search. You just do 1 or 2 times search. But eventually, you can imagine like this thought process can become really powerful. It sorts through millions of different possibilities. Then the result will be much better. And even explore things that human haven't really explored before as well.
Very cool. And I guess a ramification of this is that it sounds like now one way we can scale the accuracy of what these models put out is not just based on scaling their training data, but also now scaling this new functionality essentially that these large language models have.
One thing I think Jim Fan mentioned, which is quite interesting, is because now the O1 model actually have this sort token, they can do something quite interesting. If they spit out 2 options and user pick up one of the options as good option, that means the way of thinking in their sort token is good. Then they can take this as a high quality data to train the model further. So they have this kind of flywheel of the data and to improve the model as well.
Huge.
Yeah. That's also kind of why I think OpenAI is not exposed the sort token to the API to developers.
Right.
So as the developers, you actually can only get output token. You don't have anything in the middle.
Right. Makes a lot of sense.
And to your point before, now we actually have a new way to improve the accuracy of large language model. Previously, the only way to get a model better is spend more and more computing power on the pre-training. Now we'll probably start seeing the model processor to shift the computing power to the inference stage, because now they can take the reasoning part out of the model.
Makes a lot of sense. So we've talked a lot about what they've actually released. I want to talk now a bit more about what this means for people who are out there building AI agents, building AI tools. What should they be thinking about? What should their next steps be?
Yeah, there are a few probably different points. The first one, most straightforward, is that you actually need to learn how the new API response look like from O1 model, because now they have a few different caveats. Like O1 model, they actually restrict some of the setting as well. They seem to remove the temperature setting of the model. I assume this is probably related to how the result is output. There's also a new type of the token from the API response called like reasoning tokens, which contain those kind of reasoning data. So that's kind of one part. You kind of need to get familiar with those kind of new model and making sure your system support that. And O1 model is definitely not type of plug and play type of change. On the other side, as we mentioned before, O1 is great at certain tasks, but not good at all tasks. So one thing, probably try to think about your agentic system, which part often kind of break or not that reliable. And now you have a new option to start improving those kind of weak points in your system. You might even need to introduce some kind of like routering, because it's probably harder to expect. If you're building chatbot, it's harder to expect what kind of response or request the user will give. Then you might need to implement some kind of interesting solution, like if you receive a user request, you have a smaller model to decide, okay, is this something require very strong reasoning or just simple one, and then routing to the right model. So I would imagine things like that might come up a bit more as well.
That's really cool. So now as an AI builder, you have a new lever. You're not just funneling models based on how good they write content, for example, or based on a modality, but now you can funnel content to a different model based on whether you need it to do this thinking process or just generate. Really interesting. I mean, we work at Relevance AI. We're a platform for building this sort of agentic and generative automation. And you build an agent on Relevance AI, you select the model that powers the agent, you build a tool on Relevance AI, you select models that maybe generate text as part of some more deterministic automation. We might now have to start thinking, I imagine, about how to show off this thinking process that these models are taking, because it seems like it might become very important for builders to understand what is happening there. Have you seen anything interesting about what that might look like from a product point of view?
I think a few things to think about is that if the model start having its ability to think through multiple different strategy to get to the result, then how do we communicate that with the user? So there's a few developers I saw, they're building interesting UX to actually showcase the thinking process of the agent, and also allow user to like go back, rewind back to any point of this kind of thinking process. Maybe you want to enable a human to interact with that point, like, or give the model more instruction, like you should think in a different way. So there's a new kind of UX will start emerging for this kind of thinking token.
And I guess that would rely on either OpenAI or open source models or different model providers to actually expose those reasoning tokens so that we can see what the thinking actually looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably a good point. There obviously is open source model going to do that either way, no matter whether they expose or not.
Cool. So potentially a big win for open source moving forward in the model world. Thanks, Jason. If you're a Relevance builder, we'll be adding the O1 models very soon to the platform. But in the meantime, I'm Dan.
I'm Jason.
This has been Relevance. Thanks so much for watching.